Canton Confidential, the Karen Reed murder trial, starts right now.
Good Wednesday evening to you. Thanks for being with us. I'm Glenn Jones.
I'm J.C. Monahan. If you tuned into Canton Confidential yesterday, you undoubtedly noticed it was an abbreviated show due to some technical difficulties. So although court was not held today, we want to use this time to once again go over the most recent testimony and take a look at some of the timelines in the case.
I, for one, am glad we're here, J.C. Let's start with a rundown of who took the stand yesterday. It was a full day of court, and the only one we'll have this week. The day started with the defense wrapping up its cross-examination of Brian Higgins. Higgins is a key figure, an ATF agent and a friend of Brian Albert's. He testified to being at the Albert home on Fairview Road in Canton the night before John O'Keefe's body was found in the front yard. Last week, we learned Higgins had exchanged flirtatious text messages with Karen Reed over a 9-day period, just weeks before her boyfriend's death.
So after Higgins was excused, we heard from medical workers and 2 town employees, including the superintendent of public works. It was perhaps the most wide-ranging day of testimony so far. And we finally got a key piece of information in the prosecution's case, Karen Reed's blood alcohol content, otherwise known as BAC. Based on yesterday's testimony from medical experts, the morning Reed found John O'Keefe dead in the snow, her BAC was still above the legal limit to drive. So this was hours after the prosecution says that she hit O'Keefe with her vehicle.
Another really important moment in court, testimony from John O'Keefe's niece and nephew. This is really important because John was raising those kids as his own after both their parents died. Before we dive into those transcripts, our Kirsten Glavin has yesterday's highlights.
Direct your attention.
Back on the stand Tuesday, ATF agent Brian Higgins, who was at the home on Fairview Road the night Officer John O'Keefe was killed. Higgins grilled by Karen Reed's defense about destroying his phone's SIM card and getting rid of his cell phone.
You knew when you were throwing that phone and the destroyed SIM card in the dumpster that from that day forward, no one would ever be able to access the content of what you and Brian Albert had discussed by text messages on your old phone, correct?
Anybody.
Higgins arguing that in July of 2022, the target of an investigation he was working on got his personal number, so he needed to change it. Reed's defense pointing out the timeline, showing that he waited until September to get a new phone.
September 29th of 2022, you changed your phone number and got a new phone. And then September 30th, the next day, you were served with the preservation order, correct?
I got the preservation order on the 30th. That's correct.
Medical experts from Good Samaritan Medical Center up next, testifying to O'Keefe's hypothermia.
Yes, 80 degrees is very cold.
And questioned about Reed's hospital visit that same morning due to a Section 12 order for mental health concerns.
So it looks like 93.93.
Blood work showing 93 milligrams per deciliter, equating to a .081 blood alcohol concentration. That's slightly above the legal driving limit. This forensic toxicologist stating at around the time Reed would have had her last drink at 12:45 a.m., tests show Reed's minimum blood alcohol concentration would have been .13 with a maximum of .29.
And it's just so that it can encompass essentially anybody within the general population, that they would be somewhere in between that lower limit and that upper limit.
Last on the stand, town employees describing snowplow routes and footage taken from town cameras during certain hours that night sent over to state police.
They were able to be exported and sent.
That was our Kirsten Glavin reporting. Joining us now is Sue O'Connell, our courtroom insider for this trial and commentator. Cameras and microphones were turned off during a portion of Tuesday's testimony because John O'Keefe's niece and nephew were testifying. They are minors, so it seemed appropriate to turn the cameras off. But you were in the room. So what were your observations based on what we could not see or hear?
Well, there was a lot of warmth and care taken for these 2 witnesses who are obviously gone through a a number of traumas, and I think everyone was aware when they came in. The nephew entered the courtroom when the jury was not in the room. The uncle was with him up at the stand before the jury came in. There were a number of supporters that were in the building, in the courtroom with them. There were some friends when the niece went to testify. We think one of her friends was brought in to sit with the O'Keefe family. So I think that the care and concern that were offered to these two kids that have been through such trauma was evident. And you could see that. I think there was one juror, you start to get to know their faces and how they react. And there was one woman who just kept staring at them and smiling and trying to be a friendly face. And I think that generally that was the consensus. They did not really cross-examine the kids that much, which was expected. So I think generally, I still feel after reading the transcripts of the testimony, I only had the notes. I really wish that they hadn't been called. Obviously, I recognize that they have their own agency and they might wanted to have testified, but I hated to see them go through that. And I think that generally that's what the courtroom felt.
I just want to point out, I printed out the testimony. It's 72 pages between the niece and the nephew. Of all of this, what was accomplished overall, Sue?
I honestly don't think anything was accomplished that couldn't have accomplished through other witnesses. One of the things we got, and as has been the case with these prosecution witnesses, we hear a lot of good things that the prosecution may not want to have to know, like she was called the caretaker by the nephew. He said that one of the good times being together was that they were like a family, hanging around each other. She was nice most of the time. When she got mad at him for slowly eating a takeout that she paid for. And the way she expressed that anger was she'd get a little bit of an attitude, she'd get a little mad, and then she would ignore them, right? So she would walk away from fights. And they would only argue with each other, with the sister and the brother and Karen, maybe twice a month. And when it was good days, it was fun. We would laugh and stuff. And it was just sort of a normal, regular family is what they portrayed to us. And, also she drove them everywhere, as we've heard before.
Sure.
So it really painted a picture of kind of a regular family to me.
I guess I worry a little bit about that painting that you've just described, because the prosecution is trying to prove that Karen Reed murdered her boyfriend, the guardian of these two kids.
Yes.
And they had mostly nice things to say about it.
They did. They did offer some, kind of Easter eggs to the prosecution. There was a lot of discussion about the Ring camera between the two of them. Who had access to the app? I don't think they said Karen had access to the app. The home computer. Who had access to the home computer? I don't think Karen did. The garage door, which we heard about earlier, it was open. Remember, the niece was there. The nephew wasn't there that night.
He had to sleep over that night. So
right.
It was just the niece at home.
So she was home alone. So she was there when Karen got home, and everyone came in the morning. They testified that Karen and John had arguments, and they may not have been as happy to the outside or as happy in real life as they were to the outside, because they only fought in their bedroom. Which, of course, I fight all over the house.
But I want to just go back to a term you use, Easter egg. You're suggesting that it was planted in a way that the prosecution can come back to it later.
Yeah, exactly. And, part of that was about the console of her car. They testified a lot about how the Bluetooth, if there was a backup camera. But again, they have her car.
Right.
And we know what kind of car it is. We could have gotten that from them. We got that John had a lot of girlfriends. We already heard that. And, the big fight in Aruba that was also a bit of a dud when they did it. They talked about how it kind of initially started from their viewpoint when John was yelling at the nephew for being on the laptop while they were on vacation. Raise your hand if you haven't done that. And Karen defended him to John, and then it got into the you allegedly kissed him.
Right. So it went from there. The whole point is there were two kids on the stand that had all of this to say that it sounds to me like the prosecution could have done one other way. I think we have to wrap up, but I think the only takeaway was about what he said in January, right?
Right. And what he said we should be breaking up. And Karen said that morning, maybe I did something, maybe a snowplow hit him, maybe I had hit him. That's what the niece testified. She said, but again, these are with question marks, not with statements, and we already have this testimony. So, I just hate that they had to go through that. And keeping John O'Keefe in his death center is, of course, what we keep doing, and I hope that everyone keeps doing.
Sue O'Connell, thank you so much, as always. Still ahead on Canton Confidential, several witnesses testified to making inadvertent phone calls the night John O'Keefe died.
I think we call those butt dials. I've heard those two words so often in this trial. When we come back, a timeline of who called who and when.
After 18 days of testimony, that's the total of actual days of testimony, the jury has been presented with an enormous amount of information, some of which has been hard to track. And one question we keep hearing from you at home is who called who when? So here's our breakdown of that testimony so far.
Inadvertent calls inadvertently answered. So far, 3 witnesses called by the prosecution have testified they either placed a call or answered one but didn't mean to. They're Brian Albert, Jennifer McCabe, and Brian Higgins, 3 key players in this trial. All describe them as butt dials.
So I have to explain that.
Well, it's kind of like a butt dial.
You claimed that every one of these calls was a butt dial. Is that right?
Yes.
Well, I used a phrase that people commonly used as a butt dial.
Phone records provided by the defense indicate there are a total of 9 calls unaccounted for. Let's start with Brian Albert. He was the first witness to use the term butt dial.
Who did you call?
I inadvertently called Brian Higgins.
Brian Albert testified he had his phone with him in bed that night and admits he was awake at the time. The defense, comparing call logs, asked him about a 1-second call placed on his phone to Brian Higgins at 2:22 in the morning.
So according to you, it was a butt dial that went to his phone that somehow lasted 1 second.
Right.
Are you saying that from your closed and locked phone, you inadvertently tapped your phone one time and that initiated a butt dial to Brian Higgins?
I don't know that the phone was locked. I could have been looking through my phone. I butt dial people often and make inadvertent calls. I could have hit a last call from him by accident.
Brian Albert was shown previous testimony where he gave a possible explanation for the butt dial, given what else was happening at the time.
Isn't it true that at the other hearing you indicated that at or around the 2:22 time frame, you and your wife were in bed together in an intimate situation?
Yes, around that time, I think it reads.
Brian Higgins would go on to testify that he didn't answer that inadvertent call from Brian Albert. But this is not the only unexplained call between the two. The defense pointed to a second call made just 17 seconds after the first. That call came from Brian Higgins' phone and lasted 22 seconds. When asked about making that second call, Higgins also mentioned a butt dial.
So you think it's possible that you may have butt dialed Brian Albert for a 22-second call that you're not aware of?
I think it's possible that he could have been inadvertently called back, but I have no recollection of that, nor did I have any conversation with anybody.
Again, the defense brought up Brian Higgins' testimony from a prior hearing where his answer about making that second call was different.
You see the pink highlighted question and the pink highlighted answer?
Yes.
What's the question? Please read it for me.
Did you call him back?
What's the answer?
Yes.
You then said a little bit further in that same conversation, I did not have a conversation, correct?
I did not have a conversation with anybody.
And the question following that was, you just listened to the phone, what someone was telling you? Answer, it's possible that the phone picked up on the other end and nobody said anything, and then I terminated the call, end quote. That's what you said at the other hearing under oath, correct? Yes or no?
Meaning it's possible it could have happened.
Brian Albert was also asked to explain that call from Higgins that he says he didn't answer.
So, Mr. Albert, how'd you miss the call 17 seconds later?
Well, my wife was in the room with me, and we were hanging out, and I never got the second call from him.
Those were the 2 unexplained calls between Brian Albert and Brian Higgins. But phone records show more calls were made between them. The defense asked Brian Albert about phone calls he made after John O'Keefe's body was found in his front yard.
The morning you find out that John O'Keefe is laying dead or dying on your lawn, the first call you made at 7:20 was to Brian Higgins. Is that right?
Yes. I informed him of what was going on at my house. We were out the night before, and I thought it was important for him to know what had happened.
Albert and Higgins exchanged a few more calls that morning before Brian Higgins returned to 34 Fairview Road just a short time later.
Were those many calls an effort to get stories straight at the time?
No, absolutely not.
Whose idea was it for you to drive to Brian Albert's house that morning?
It was my idea.
Was it important to you to speak with Brian Albert in person rather than over text or phone call?
No, it was important to support the people that were there.
Now to Jennifer McCabe, who also testified she placed some inadvertent calls, 7 in total, made to John O'Keefe's phone. Here's the call log presented by the defense. At 12:14 and 12:18, McCabe testified she and O'Keefe spoke by phone. But the next series of calls are unaccounted for. 7 calls between 12:29 and 12:50.
I don't remember making any of those calls, so my assumption is I put my phone in my back pocket, and that was it.
Records of those missed calls came from an extraction of John O'Keefe's phone.
According to the extraction reports that you've seen this morning, comparing yours to his, every single one of those calls was deleted off your phone, correct? According to the reports.
According to that report, yes.
The fact is that you deleted your call records before you turned your phone in, didn't you, Ms. McCabe? That's what that report shows.
Absolutely not.
Once more, the defense pushed back, leaving jurors to infer a possible explanation for the flurry of calls McCabe denies making.
What's one of the first things you do if you're with your daughter or your husband or a friend and you're in your house and you misplace your phone? What do you do?
I'll ask them to call my phone.
Right. Even over and over and over, right?
Correct.
Could be as many as 5, 6, 7 times.
Usually I hear it the first or second time.
You're looking for a buzz or a ring, isn't that right?
Correct.
And you might do that if you're searching for a missing phone, correct?
Correct.
When we come back, a closer look at new evidence presented in court this week regarding Karen Reed's blood alcohol content. Stay with us. You're watching Canton Confidential.
I'm Glenn Jones in the newsroom with Catherine Luftus, who provides legal analysis for us on Canton Confidential, the Karen Reed murder trial. You might also recognize her from TikTok. Note my objection.
That's right.
Is your handle on TikTok. All right, let's talk about today's testimony. I think perhaps the biggest thing we heard is new forensic evidence, including what Karen Reed's blood alcohol level was on the morning that John O'Keefe died. What do you make about the information that we heard?
I thought it was really interesting. We've been leading up to this for quite some time, and as we've talked about, we haven't really seen any of the physical evidence, any of the forensics evidence. So this is really the first time the jury was able to hear from the doctors, from the pathologists about what was happening that morning at Good Samaritan Hospital, the blood draw that was taken. The pathologist testified to that, and then the toxicologist basically testified that at 9 o'clock that morning, Karen Reed's blood alcohol level was in the area of 0.08, and based on the extrapolation back towards when they believe her last drink was approximately 12:30, 12:45. They believe that at the time of the incident, her blood alcohol level was between 0.13 and 0.29. Now, that's a big spread.
Sure, yeah. And what's the jury supposed to make of that?
So it's interesting because even at a 0.13 in Massachusetts, and we didn't get into this with the prosecution. I'm not sure whether they'll present this through someplace else. A 0.08 is presumptively intoxicated. So a 0.13, even if it were at the very minimum, it's a pretty high level of intoxication. And the reason for the variance between the minimum and the maximum, as the toxicologist explained, is they don't have the exact time when the drinks were stopped. So they allow for basically a 2-hour window on the front end and the back end. But I do think if that's taken, if the jury understood the evidence, which is always one of the prongs that really the prosecutor needs to meet, you need to be able to explain the evidence in the proper way. I do think it's telling, and it gives a little bit more of a background as to maybe what Karen Reed's state of mind is or why she was acting a certain way.
And let's peel back the layer a little bit for the audience, because if she was above the legal limit, hours after the prosecution says John O'Keefe was hit by the car, it stands to reason in the prosecution's case that she was also intoxicated when she was driving that vehicle.
That's correct. And she's charged with a few different things. The first is second-degree murder, and the second is manslaughter while operating under the influence. So that actually is one of their theories, is that she was intoxicated when she left the bar, that she was intoxicated when they alleged she hit John O'Keefe. So, again, it's a question of whether the jury believes the evidence as it was presented today. But I do think if they do, it certainly gives a little bit more credence to the prosecution's theory.
All right, let's talk about... I sure do like hearing from Catherine Luftus. She breaks it down so cleanly. Yes. That was a portion of my conversation with her after yesterday's testimony. The entire discussion was posted online as a web extra.
And we are hoping to offer more extras like that on our website as this trial continues. Right now, you can find all of our Canton Confidential coverage by heading to NBC10Boston.com. You just click on the Karen Reed tab at the top of the page. Stay right there. We're back in just a moment. A reminder, there will be no testimony for the rest of the week.
Court will be back in session on Monday morning. Have a great night.
As always, you can follow every second of this trial as it unfolds live on our website, YouTube page, and on NECN.